3 Apache widows asked for twins, and the breeder's answer changed their fate. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth, and the soft light touched the tops of the small houses scattered along the dusty roads. Each woman moved slowly, their steps careful, as if the weight of the past year pressed upon them with every breath. They had all lost their husbands in the same harsh winter, a winter that had come with sickness and cold that seemed impossible to escape. Now, the quiet village felt emptier than ever, and the women felt the ache of loneliness like a stone in their hearts. The first of the 3, a woman named Leela, arrived first. Her eyes were dark, with the shadow of sleepless nights etched beneath them. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, though her shoulders slumped slightly, betraying her grief. Leela had been married to a man who was known for his gentle laughter and strong hands. When he died, the house had grown silent, and the garden he loved so much had started to wither. She had spent months wandering through their small home, touching the objects he had once held, trying to make sense of a world that felt suddenly hollow. Soon after, Mara appeared, carrying a small bundle of blankets for the children she had to care for alone. Her children were still young, too young to understand why their father would never come home. Mara's husband had been a kind, patient man who had always found joy in simple things. The way the morning sun fell on the river, the way the wind made the trees sway. His absence left a quiet emptiness in their home, a space filled with unanswered questions. Mara had learned to smile for her children, though each smile cost her, a reminder that she had to be strong even when she felt broken. The third woman, Naomi, came last. She moved carefully, as though stepping into a world that had shifted beneath her feet. Naomi's husband had been a storyteller, someone who filled every room with laughter and tales of the old days. His death had left her with silence, and the nights were the hardest. She would lie awake, listening to the wind whistling through the cracks of the walls, wishing she could hear his voice one last time. Naomi had always believed in the magic of stories, in the power of hope, but now even hope felt fragile, like a thread that could snap at any moment. Despite their grief, the 3 women had formed a bond in the months after their loss. They would meet in the mornings at the edge of the village before the day began. They spoke little at first, sharing small gestures, a nod, a smile, the simple act of being together. Over time, their conversations grew, and they began to share more than just moments. They shared their pain, their fears, and most importantly, their dreams. One morning, as the sun rose higher, casting golden light across the village, the 3 women sat together under a large cottonwood tree. The air was filled with the scent of dry grass and the faint hint of smoke from cooking fires in the distance. Leela broke the silence first. "I keep thinking about the future," she said softly, her voice trembling a little. "I keep wondering, how can we make sure our families survive? How can we make sure our children have someone to look after them, someone to keep our people going?" Mara nodded, her fingers playing with the edge of the blanket she held. "I think about that too," she said. "I've been dreaming, maybe foolishly, but I've been dreaming of having twins. 2 at once, so that we can rebuild faster, so that life doesn't feel so empty anymore." Her eyes shone with a mixture of hope and fear. "Twins would be a blessing, don't you think? 2 new lives to carry forward our families, our traditions." Naomi looked at both women, her lips pressed together. She had thought of it too, though she had never spoken it aloud. "I've thought the same," she admitted quietly. "It sounds strange, maybe selfish, but I want to see new life again. I want to feel that hope." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I want to feel that there is something waiting for us, something that will make the pain a little easier to bear." For a long time they sat in silence, the wind rustling the leaves above them. Their dreams seemed fragile, almost impossible, yet the very act of sharing them made them feel lighter. They had lost so much, yet somehow, by speaking of hope, they were beginning to feel alive again. Eventually, Leela spoke again. "I heard about someone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a breeder nearby, someone who takes care of rare livestock. They say he can help in ways no one else can. Maybe he could help us." Mara's eyes widened. "Do you really think so?" she asked, her voice full of both excitement and caution. "Would he even listen to us?" Naomi shook her head slowly. "It's worth trying," she said. "We have nothing to lose. Maybe he can't give us twins, but maybe he can guide us, show us a way to bring life back into our homes." And so, with their hearts heavy but filled with cautious hope, the three women decided to visit the breeder. They planned to go together the next morning, walking through the winding paths of the reservation, carrying their wishes like fragile treasures in their hands. That night, each of them went home with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Leela looked at the empty chair at her table and imagined a child sitting there, laughing, reaching for the food she served. Mara tucked her children into bed and whispered stories of new beginnings, imagining twins who would bring laughter to their small home. Naomi lit a candle and told herself that perhaps the universe could still surprise her, that maybe her husband's stories weren't over, that life could still be full of miracles. The next morning, the three women walked together, their feet moving carefully along the uneven paths. The village was quiet, as if holding its breath, and the sun cast long shadows on the ground. They spoke little, each lost in her own thoughts, imagining what might happen when they met the breeder. When they arrived at the farm, they were greeted by the soft lowing of animals and the earthy smell of hay and soil. The breeder, an older man with kind eyes and hands worn from years of hard work, came out to meet them. He listened as the women explained their request, their voices trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. They told him why twins mattered to them, how it could change the course of their lives, and how it might bring back the sense of family they had lost. The breeder did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at them thoughtfully, as though weighing their words against something far older and wiser. "Life," he said finally, "is never predictable. Sometimes it gives us exactly what we ask for, and sometimes it gives us something we didn't expect. But it always gives us a chance to hope, to grow, and to keep moving forward." The women nodded, unsure of what he meant, yet feeling a spark of hope. Perhaps he could help them. Perhaps, in ways they did not yet understand, their lives could begin again. As they left the farm that day, the sun was higher in the sky, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. They walked back to the village, hands brushing occasionally, a quiet bond forming between them. They did not know what the future held, but for the first time in many months, they felt a glimmer of something precious, possibility. And so, under the warm light of a new day, three Apache widows began a journey that would challenge their understanding of life, hope, and family. They were seeking twins, but what they would find instead was something even more powerful: the courage to hope again, the strength to rebuild, and the realization that life often gives its greatest gifts in ways no one can predict. The day after their visit to the breeder, the three women awoke with a mixture of hope and nervousness. The sun had barely touched the horizon, and the village was quiet except for the occasional crow or the distant sound of a dog barking. Leela, Mara, and Naomi had agreed to meet at the edge of the village before heading to the farm together. Each carried a small bundle of items, gifts for the breeder, a sign of respect for the man who might hold the key to their wishes. Leela's bundle contained a loaf of homemade bread, carefully wrapped in cloth. She had baked it the night before, kneading the dough with thoughts of the future swirling in her mind. Each press of her hands against the dough was a silent prayer, a wish for new beginnings. Mara carried a small basket of eggs from her chickens, a simple offering that reflected her belief in life and growth. Naomi, who had always loved flowers, brought a small bouquet of wildflowers, vibrant in color and fragrance, a symbol of hope and renewal. As they walked, the three women spoke quietly, their conversation weaving between fear and anticipation. "Do you think he will really help us?" Mara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or will he just tell us what we already know, that life isn't fair?" Leela shook her head, trying to stay optimistic. "I don't know," she admitted, "but at least he listened yesterday. That counts for something. He didn't laugh or dismiss us. That gives me hope." Naomi fell silent for a moment, picking a small stone from the path and turning it over in her hand. "I think we have to believe he can help," she said softly, "even if it isn't exactly what we want. Sometimes help comes in ways we don't expect." Her eyes met Mara's and Leela's, and they nodded, understanding that hope was fragile but necessary. By mid-morning, they reached the breeder's farm. The low hum of life greeted them, cows moving slowly across the fields, the soft bleating of goats, and the occasional cluck of chickens. The breeder was already there, tending to a small pen of young animals. His hands were strong and weathered, shaped by years of care and labor. When he saw the women, he straightened and walked toward them, a gentle smile on his face. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I see you brought gifts. That is thoughtful of you." He gestured for them to set the bundles on a nearby bench. The women placed their offerings carefully, feeling a small sense of pride and gratitude. The breeder led them to a shaded area near the barn. The air was warm, carrying the scents of hay, soil, and the faint sweetness of blooming flowers. He sat down on a wooden stool, and the women arranged themselves on the ground before him. Leela spoke first, her hands folded in her lap. "We came here because we need your help," she said. "We know it is unusual, but we hope you understand. We want to have twins. Not just for ourselves, but for our children, for our families, for our community." Her voice shook slightly, betraying the depth of her longing. The breeder nodded slowly, listening with the patience of someone who had heard many stories over the years. "I understand," he said finally. "I hear your hope and I see your hearts. But life does not always give us what we ask for. Sometimes it gives us something better, sometimes something different. But it always gives us a chance to grow, to adapt, to keep moving forward." Mara shifted uncomfortably, unsure what to say. "But can you help us?" she asked. "Is there a way to make it happen? Twins, it feels like the only way we can heal." The breeder sighed gently. "I cannot promise twins. That is not how life works. Nature has its own rules. But there are other ways to bring hope, to rebuild your families, to care for your children and your community. I can guide you, if you are willing to listen, to follow paths that you may not have considered." Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she picked at the edge of her shawl. I don't know if I can accept that," she admitted. "I thought I wanted twins, but maybe what we truly need is something else, something we can't see yet." The breeder nodded. "Yes. You have already taken the first step by asking. The next step is to trust life, to trust yourself, and to be willing to receive what is offered. Sometimes, what we think we want is not what we truly need. What we need is often something that brings growth, connection, and strength." For a long moment, the women were silent. The words of the breeder floated in the warm morning air, mixing with the sounds of the animals and the gentle rustling of the trees. The women felt a mixture of disappointment, hope, and curiosity. They had come expecting an answer, a clear path to the future they imagined. Instead, they were offered guidance, wisdom, and the possibility of unexpected blessings. The breeder then stood and began to walk slowly among the animals, inviting the women to follow. "Look at these creatures," he said. "Each one is different, each one has its own strengths and weaknesses. Some may seem ordinary, but with care and patience, they grow into something remarkable. Life works the same way with people. What seems impossible now may become possible in ways you cannot yet imagine." As they walked, the women began to notice small things they had overlooked before. A young calf struggled to stand, its legs trembling, but with encouragement, it eventually took its first steps. A small goat, born weaker than the others, found its way to the warmth of the herd and began to thrive. The women watched, mesmerized, realizing that life's miracles often came quietly, without fanfare, and often when least expected. The breeder stopped near a small pen where a few newborn animals huddled together. "These little ones didn't arrive as twins," he said, "but each has found a place, a purpose. You may not get what you imagine, but you can still nurture, protect, and guide life in meaningful ways. That is the true blessing." The women exchanged glances, beginning to understand what he meant. Their desire for twins had been about hope, about new beginnings, about rebuilding what had been lost. But the breeder was showing them that hope and new life could arrive in many forms, sometimes more meaningful than they could imagine. Leela knelt by the pen, her fingers gently brushing the soft fur of a young goat. She felt a small spark of warmth in her chest, a flicker of hope that had been dormant for months. "I think I understand," she whispered. "It's not about having twins exactly, it's about giving life a chance in whatever form it comes." Mara bent down to touch a newborn calf, its eyes wide and curious. "Yes," she said softly, "we can still nurture, still love, still rebuild. Maybe that is even better than what we imagined." Naomi stood back for a moment, watching the animals and the women around her. She realized that hope had returned, fragile but persistent. "I see it now," she said. "Life doesn't always give what we ask for, but it gives what we need, and maybe that is enough." The rest of the morning passed in quiet reflection. The breeder continued to guide them, showing them the different ways they could care for the animals, how to nurture life, how to observe and learn from the world around them. He did not offer promises, but he offered knowledge, patience, and wisdom, things that would help them in ways no magic could. When it was time to leave, the women felt a mix of emotions. They were not promised twins, but they felt lighter, as though a small weight had been lifted from their hearts. They understood that the journey ahead would not be easy, that life would still bring challenges, but they now saw that hope could be nurtured in unexpected ways. As they walked back to the village, the sun was high in the sky, casting warm light across the fields. The three women moved together, hands brushing occasionally, a silent promise of mutual support. They spoke little, for words were not needed. The understanding between them was enough. By the time they reached the edge of the village, each woman felt a renewed sense of purpose. Leela thought of her empty home and the small ways she could rebuild it. Mara thought of her children and the lessons she could teach them about resilience and love. Naomi thought of the stories her husband had told, stories that now seemed to have a new chapter waiting to be written. That evening, as the village settled into quiet, the three women sat together under the same cottonwood tree where they had first shared their hopes. They spoke of what they had learned, of the small miracles they had witnessed, and of the possibilities that awaited them. They realized that their journey was only beginning, that life had much to teach them, and that hope, when nurtured with patience and care, could grow stronger than they had ever imagined. And so, the three widows who had come seeking a very specific blessing left with something far greater: the understanding that life's gifts often arrive quietly, unexpectedly, and in ways that can change not only their own fates but the future of their families and their community. The days after the visit to the breeder passed slowly, each one blending into the next. The three women continued their routines, caring for their homes, their children, and their small gardens. Yet in the quiet moments between chores, their minds often wandered back to the farm, to the animals, and to the breeder's words. The promise of hope had been subtle, almost invisible, but it had planted a seed that refused to fade. Leela noticed it first. She was kneeling in her garden, pulling weeds and tending to the small sprouts that had begun to grow. Her hands were rough from work, and the soil smelled earthy and fresh. As she worked, she thought about the young goat and the calf she had seen at the breeder's farm. Their small, fragile steps had left a lasting impression on her. She realized that life, no matter how small or seemingly ordinary, carried the power to teach patience and resilience. Her mind returned to the desire that had brought her to the farm in the first place: twins. At first, the thought of not having them made her feel heavy with disappointment. She had imagined holding two newborns in her arms, seeing them grow together, laughing and learning side by side. But now, as she worked in the garden, she began to understand the breeder's message. Perhaps the twins she longed for were not literal. Perhaps they were opportunities, experiences, and moments of growth that could arrive in unexpected forms. Mara, meanwhile, found herself observing her children more closely. She watched how they interacted with the animals she kept at home, noticing the curiosity in their eyes and the careful way they approached the smaller creatures. She saw a spark of joy that had been missing since their father's death, a light that made her heart ache with both sorrow and hope. It reminded her of the calves and goats at the breeder's farm, creatures struggling but learning to stand, finding their place in the world. She realized that her children, too, were like those animals, fragile yet resilient, capable of growth and joy even after loss. Naomi spent her days tending to the small library of books she kept for the children and neighbors. She read aloud to the young ones, sharing stories that her husband had once told, stories filled with lessons about courage, kindness, and the magic of life. Each time she read, she felt a connection to the past and a sense of continuity. She remembered the breeder's words about the unexpected ways life offers blessings. Naomi began to notice small miracles in her own life: a child's laughter after a day of grief, a neighbor's kindness, or the simple growth of a plant she had nurtured. These moments were tiny, almost invisible, but they carried the power of hope she had been searching for. One afternoon, the three women met at their usual place under the cottonwood tree. The sun was warm and the wind whispered through the leaves, carrying the smell of wildflowers and fresh earth. They spoke quietly at first, sharing observations about their daily lives. Then Mara broke the silence. "I think I understand what he meant," she said, her voice soft but certain. "The breeder, he wasn't just talking about animals. He was showing us how life can still be beautiful and meaningful, even when it doesn't look the way we expect." Leela nodded slowly. "Yes. I wanted twins, yes, but what I really needed was hope. I needed to believe that life could continue, that it could grow again. And I see now that it is growing, in small ways, in ways I never noticed before." Naomi smiled faintly. "I think the lesson is that we cannot control everything," she said. "We cannot demand life to give us exactly what we want, but we can nurture what we have, care for those around us, and allow life to surprise us. The breeder helped us see that." The women sat quietly for a moment, feeling the warmth of the sun on their faces. They had come to the farm seeking a specific answer, and while that answer had not come in the form they had expected, something more profound had begun to take root. They realized that life was not about achieving a single goal, but about embracing the journey, finding meaning in the challenges, and accepting the blessings, no matter their form. A few days later, the breeder invited them to visit his farm again. He wanted to show them something important, something that might help them understand the next step on their journey. The women accepted, walking together once more through the winding paths of the reservation. The sun was higher in the sky this time, and the warmth filled the air with promise. When they arrived, the breeder led them to a quiet corner of the farm, away from the main pens and fields. There, nestled among tall grass and wildflowers, were several young animals, some strong, some struggling, but all alive and learning to thrive. "These little ones," the breeder said, "are not the same, but each has its place. Life does not create duplicates in the way humans imagine. It creates uniqueness, individuality. Each life is a gift, and each gift carries the potential to change the world, even in small ways." The women watched as the animals moved, each finding its own path, learning to stand and walk and interact with the world around them. Leela felt a lump in her throat as she realized that this was a mirror of her own life, of her children's lives, and of the lives of the people she cared for. Sometimes, the breeder continued, what we ask for is not what we need. We may wish for twins or for something specific, but life has a way of giving us what we are truly capable of handling, what will help us grow the most. You have already taken the first step by seeking guidance, by opening your hearts. Now it is time to trust that the path will become clear. Mara knelt down beside a young calf that had been struggling to walk. She reached out a hand, guiding it gently, encouraging it to take steady steps. "I see it now," she whispered. Life is about helping others, about nurturing what is fragile until it becomes strong. That is the blessing. Naomi crouched near a small group of goats, watching them interact. She realized that she had been searching for miracles in the wrong places. They were not always grand or dramatic. They were quiet, persistent, and often hidden in small moments of care and attention. "The twins I wanted," she murmured to herself, "are not the goal. The goal is to nurture, to care, to bring life forward in any way we can." Leela looked around at the animals, the land, and the breeder, and a sense of clarity began to settle over her. She understood that the journey ahead would require patience, love, and courage. It would not be easy, and it would not always match her expectations, but it could still be meaningful. The realization brought her a sense of peace she had not felt in months. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting golden light across the farm, the women gathered together. They thanked the breeder for his guidance and began the walk back to their village. The air was filled with the scent of grass and wildflowers, and the soft sounds of animals settling in for the night. Along the way, they talked about what they had learned. They shared ideas for how they could bring small changes to their homes and communities, how they could nurture life and hope in ways that did not rely on miracles, but on effort, love, and perseverance. Each step felt lighter than the last, as though the burden of grief had lessened slightly with understanding and purpose. When they reached the village, the first stars had begun to appear in the sky. The quiet of the evening was comforting, a reminder that even in darkness, light could be found. The women parted ways with a sense of renewed determination, each carrying the lessons of the day in her heart. That night, Leela lay in bed, thinking about the young animals she had seen and the lessons they represented. She realized that life's beauty was in the struggle, in the act of standing up after falling, in the quiet moments of growth and learning. Mara tucked her children in and whispered stories of resilience and hope, knowing that even small acts could create lasting change. Naomi lit a candle and thought of her husband's stories, realizing that the magic of life was not in the grand gestures, but in the care and love she offered every day. By the end of the week, the three women had begun small projects in their homes and gardens, inspired by the lessons from the breeder. Leela planted new seeds, nurturing them carefully and observing their growth. Mara started spending more time with her children outdoors, teaching them patience and responsibility. Naomi organized a small reading circle, sharing stories and wisdom with children and neighbors, creating a ripple of hope and connection throughout the village. Through these actions, the women began to see changes not only in their own lives but in their community. Others noticed their renewed energy and determination, and soon neighbors offered help, shared resources, and joined in small projects. The widows had begun to create a network of care and support, showing that life's blessings often arrived in the form of community, cooperation, and shared effort rather than in a single miraculous event. And so the desire for twins, while still a quiet thought in the back of their minds, became less urgent. The women had discovered something far more valuable, the understanding that life's gifts are often hidden in small moments, in growth, in connection, and in the strength to keep moving forward. The breeder's guidance had set them on a path that would change not only their fate but the lives of those around them, proving that hope, when nurtured, could flourish in ways they had never imagined. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the three women began to notice subtle but meaningful changes in their lives. The lessons they had learned from the breeder were slowly taking root, transforming not only their understanding of hope and life, but also the way they interacted with the world around them. The desire for twins, which had once seemed like the only path to healing, became less urgent as they discovered that life had other ways of bringing joy, growth, and renewal. Leela was the first to experience a noticeable shift. Her home, once filled with silence and grief, now echoed with the quiet energy of small life. She had begun caring for a young orphaned child from the village, a boy who had lost his parents in a distant accident. Leela had never imagined herself as a mother again, yet when the boy arrived, she felt an unexpected warmth in her heart. His small hands clung to hers as they walked through the garden, and his laughter, though soft at first, gradually filled the rooms that had been empty for too long. At first, Leela had worried that she would fail him, that the child would never see her as a mother, that she could not replace the life he had lost. But as days passed, she realized that her love and care, however imperfect, were enough. She guided him patiently, teaching him small lessons about life, about the garden, and about the animals she kept. In return, the boy taught her to smile again, to find joy in small victories, and to see hope not as a distant dream but as something that could grow within her home, slowly and steadily. Mara's life had also begun to change in surprising ways. She had discovered a natural talent for farming, a skill that had lain dormant until necessity awakened it. With the lessons she had learned from the breeder, she began to improve her small plot of land, planting vegetables and tending to her livestock with care and precision. Her garden began to flourish, producing more food than she had ever imagined possible. Word of Mara's skill spread throughout the village. Neighbors began to seek her advice, and soon she found herself helping others improve their own gardens. The act of nurturing life, of guiding growth, gave Mara a sense of purpose she had not felt since her husband's passing. She realized that life's blessings were not always about having exactly what she had imagined. They were often hidden in the talents and opportunities that emerged when she was willing to work and care for others. Naomi's journey took a different but equally profound path. She had always loved stories, and she had always believed in their power to heal and teach. With the breeder's guidance in mind, she began to organize small storytelling gatherings for the children in her village. At first, it was a modest affair, just a handful of young ones sitting on the floor as she read aloud from the books her husband had cherished. But over time, more children came, and eventually, adults joined as well, listening to the tales and sharing their own stories. Through these gatherings, Naomi found a new sense of connection. She realized that stories, like life itself, had a way of creating bonds, of nurturing hope, and of helping people heal. She saw the children's eyes light up with imagination, and she felt the power of small acts to change lives. In guiding others, she discovered her own strength and resilience, understanding that the magic she had sought in having twins was present in the ability to influence lives, to nurture minds, and to bring a sense of wonder back into the community. One day, the three women met under the cottonwood tree, as they often did. The afternoon sun bathed the village in warm light, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers and earth. They spoke excitedly about the small miracles that had begun to unfold in their lives, realizing that the breeder's guidance had set them on paths they could never have anticipated. Leela spoke first. "I never imagined taking in a child," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I thought I wanted twins to rebuild my family, but what I have now, it's more than I could have imagined. Every day with him teaches me something new about love, patience, and hope." Mara smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "And my garden, it's more than just food," she said. It's life, growth, and community. I see my neighbors learning, my children learning, and I realize that nurturing life doesn't need to happen all at once. It grows step by step, just like our families and our community. Naomi looked at both women, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. And the stories, she said softly, they remind us that life continues, that even after loss, there is beauty, learning, and joy. We don't need twins to rebuild. We need understanding, patience, and the willingness to nurture what we have. That is the real blessing. The women laughed softly, a sound that had been missing from their lives for months. The laughter was light, genuine, and filled with relief. They had discovered that the journey they had begun with a very specific wish had led them to something far greater. The ability to rebuild, to nurture, and to create a future that was rich in meaning, even if it was not exactly what they had imagined. As the weeks continued, their efforts began to have an even wider impact. Leela's home became a safe place for children who needed care. Mara's garden became a source of food and knowledge for the entire village. Naomi's storytelling circle inspired others to share their own stories, creating a ripple effect of hope and connection. The community began to notice the change, and slowly the village itself began to feel alive again, filled with energy, cooperation, and the quiet joy of growth. One afternoon, the breeder invited them to visit the farm again. This time he wanted to show them how far they had come. As they walked through the fields, he pointed to the young animals they had seen weeks ago. "Look at them now," he said. "Some were struggling when you first visited, but with care, attention, and patience, they have grown strong. You see what happens when life is nurtured. It flourishes." The women looked closely at the animals. The once fragile calf now moved confidently across the field. The young goats played and explored, curious and full of energy. The women felt a sense of pride and joy, realizing that the lessons they had applied in their own lives had mirrored the growth they saw in the animals. "You have each taken what you have learned and applied it," the breeder said. "You have nurtured life in whatever form it took. That is the true blessing. Life rarely gives exactly what we ask for, but it gives what we need to grow, to learn, and to make a difference." Leela, Mara, and Naomi exchanged glances, understanding fully for the first time what the breeder meant. Their original wish for twins had not been fulfilled, yet they had been given something far more powerful: the ability to rebuild their lives, to nurture others, and to create hope where it had seemed lost. As they walked back to the village, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and gold. The warmth of the evening matched the warmth in their hearts. They spoke little, each lost in her own thoughts, reflecting on how much had changed in just a few weeks. When they reached the village, they found their neighbors gathered, curious about the changes they had noticed. Children laughed and played, gardens thrived, and the village felt alive in a way it hadn't since the difficult winter that had claimed so much. Leela, Mara, and Naomi realized that the real impact of their journey was not just on their own lives, but on the lives of everyone around them. That night, as the village settled into quiet, the three women sat under the cottonwood tree once more. The stars twinkled above, and the air was filled with the gentle sounds of nature settling in for the night. They spoke of their experiences, their growth, and the unexpected blessings that had come into their lives. Leela held the hand of the child who now lived with her, feeling the warmth and trust between them. Mara looked over her flourishing garden, proud of the food and life it provided. Naomi held a small book, thinking of the stories yet to be shared, the lessons yet to be taught, and the hope yet to grow. They had set out to find twins, believing that was the key to healing, to family, and to hope. But in the end, they had discovered something far greater: the power of care, the strength of patience, and the true meaning of nurturing life. They had learned that blessings often arrive quietly, in small steps, and that the journey itself could transform their lives in ways no one could have predicted. And so, as the night deepened and the stars shone brightly overhead, the three women sat together in quiet reflection, hearts full of gratitude, hope, and understanding. Life had changed for them, not in the way they had imagined, but in the way it was meant to, bringing growth, joy, and a sense of purpose that would carry them forward for years to come. Time passed, and the lives of Leela, Mara, and Naomi continued to change in ways they had never imagined. The quiet strength they had discovered in themselves and in each other grew steadily, shaping not only their own futures, but also the lives of the children and neighbors around them. The village itself seemed to breathe more freely, as though hope and care had become tangible forces, flowing through every home and every heart. Leela had settled fully into her new role as a caregiver for the young orphaned boy. At first, she had worried that she might not be enough for him, that the child's sorrow would be too heavy to share. But day by day, she realized that love and patience were stronger than fear. She watched him learn to run, laugh, and explore the garden she tended with such care. He would mimic her movements as she worked, trying to plant seeds just as she did, and she found herself laughing at his small, determined hands. Through him, Leela rediscovered a sense of family she had thought lost forever. She realized that family was not only defined by blood but by love, attention, and presence. She had set out hoping for twins, believing that two children might heal her heart, but the boy who had come into her life was more than enough. He brought joy, laughter, and a sense of purpose that filled her home in a way she had never imagined possible. Mara's garden had become more than just a source of food. It had become a symbol of life, growth, and community. Her careful attention and guidance had inspired her neighbors to improve their own gardens. Children came after school to help plant seeds, learning the value of patience, care, and responsibility. Adults came to seek advice, to share seeds, and to exchange knowledge. Mara found herself at the center of a quiet movement, a living example of how one person's care could ripple outward, affecting many lives. Her own children thrived under her guidance. They learned to observe, to nurture, and to take pride in small accomplishments. Mara realized that she had been searching for miracles in the wrong way. She had wanted twins to rebuild her family quickly, but what she had found instead was a deeper, more lasting impact. A family and community growing together, learning from one another, and flourishing in ways she could never have imagined. Naomi's storytelling gatherings had grown into a small tradition in the village. What had begun as a few children listening quietly in her home now included dozens of children and even adults. The stories were no longer just about magic or adventure. They were about life, resilience, hope, and learning from both joy and sorrow. She encouraged children to tell their own stories, to share experiences and dreams, creating a network of connection that strengthened the community in ways no one had predicted. Through these gatherings, Naomi discovered the true meaning of influence. She realized that while she could not change the past or bring back those they had lost, she could shape the future through small acts of care, guidance, and inspiration. Her original wish for twins had been about creating new life, but what she had discovered was that nurturing hope, imagination, and resilience in others could be even more powerful. One afternoon, the three women met again under the cottonwood tree, the place where they had first shared their hopes and fears. The sun was warm, and the air carried the sweet scent of wildflowers. They spoke of the changes they had seen, the lives they had touched, and the strength they had discovered within themselves. Leela smiled as she recounted a small moment from that morning. "He helped me plant tomatoes today," she said, her eyes sparkling. At first, he was clumsy and frustrated, but then he got the hang of it. When he saw the small seeds grow into tiny plants, he laughed and jumped with joy. I realized that watching him learn was as precious as any blessing I could have imagined. Mara laughed softly. "And my children harvested the first carrots today," she said. They brought them to the neighbors, and everyone praised them. I never imagined that something as simple as a garden could bring so much happiness, not only to us but to others as well. Naomi leaned back against the trunk of the tree, closing her eyes for a moment. "And the children's stories," she said softly, "they remind me that life continues, even after loss. Every story told is a small seed of hope, growing quietly in the hearts of everyone who listens." The women fell silent for a few moments, reflecting on the journey they had undertaken. They had begun with a very specific wish, believing that having twins was the key to restoring their families and finding joy again. But over time, they realized that the wish had been only the starting point. The true gifts had been patience, resilience, care, and the ability to nurture life in all its forms. The breeder visited them a few weeks later, curious to see how far the women had come. He arrived quietly, walking through the village with a calm presence that carried authority and wisdom. When he saw Layla, Mara, and Naomi gathered under the cottonwood tree, he smiled, a soft expression of pride on his face. "You have grown," he said gently. "Not just in strength, but in understanding. You have learned that life's blessings are rarely exactly what we expect, but they are often more meaningful than we can imagine. You have nurtured life, inspired others, and rebuilt hope in ways that cannot be measured." The women looked at each other, their eyes shining with understanding. Leela spoke first. "We came to you asking for twins, thinking that was the answer to our grief, but we have learned something far more important. Life is not about what we wish for, it's about what we do with what is given to us." Mara nodded. "We realize that caring for others, nurturing growth, and supporting our community can bring joy and purpose even in the face of loss. That is the blessing we did not expect." Naomi smiled, her voice soft but firm. "We have learned that hope grows not in the wish for what we cannot control, but in the small acts of love, attention, and guidance we give to others. That is what restores life and family, even when it looks different from what we imagined." The breeder placed a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. "You have understood the lesson well. Life is full of challenges, loss, and uncertainty, but it is also full of opportunities for growth, connection, and unexpected blessings. You have taken the difficult path, and in doing so, you have discovered the true meaning of hope and family." As the sun set over the village, the three women walked back to their homes together, their hearts light and full of gratitude. The air was warm, and the sky was painted in shades of pink, orange, and gold. They spoke quietly of their plans, their dreams, and the ways they could continue to nurture life and hope in the community. In the weeks and months that followed, their efforts continued to bear fruit. Leela's home became a place of safety and love for the children who needed it. Mara's garden grew richer and more abundant, providing food, work, and knowledge for the villagers. Naomi's storytelling gatherings became a cherished tradition, inspiring creativity, hope, and connection across generations. The village itself began to change, shaped by the quiet dedication of the three women. Where there had been grief and silence, there was now laughter, learning, and cooperation. Children played together in the gardens, adults shared their resources and knowledge, and a sense of hope and resilience spread quietly but powerfully through the community. Years later, when they looked back on the journey that had begun with a simple wish for twins, the women understood how much they had grown and how much they had changed the lives of others. They realized that life's gifts often arrive in unexpected forms, and that the true measure of blessing is not in what is given, but in how it is nurtured, shared, and multiplied. Leela watched her young boy run through the garden, his laughter echoing in the warm air. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment and peace, knowing that she had been able to create a home full of love and learning. Mara stood among her flourishing plants, smiling at the children helping her harvest vegetables, proud of the life she had nurtured and the community she had strengthened. Naomi listened to the stories of children and adults alike, inspired by the way hope and imagination could grow when guided with care. The three women often met under the cottonwood tree, reflecting on their journey and the lessons they had learned. They spoke of loss, hope, and the unexpected blessings that had shaped their lives. They laughed, shared memories, and dreamed of new ways to support their community. In the end, the wish for twins had been fulfilled in a way no one could have predicted, not through literal children, but through the growth, love, and life they had nurtured in others. They had discovered that family, hope, and blessings are not always what we imagine, but they are often far more powerful and enduring than we could ever expect. And so, under the stars, with hearts full of gratitude and hope, the three women understood that life's true gifts are quiet, patient, and often hidden in the care we give, the love we share, and the hope we nurture. They had set out to rebuild their lives, and in doing so, they had changed not only their own fates but the future of their families, their children, and their entire community.